Live to Hom-Utsi in central Ukraine, where our correspondent Gulliver Cragg is standing by. Gulliver, before we turn to the latest on what's been happening at the nuclear plant, tell us a little bit more about the situation where you are now.
Well, this part of central Ukraine, rural area like this, is normally pretty far from the fighting and spared any kinds of noises of explosions. And so when I was out walking yesterday evening and heard something that sounded like an explosion, I also saw dark clouds on the horizon and presumed it was thunder. But later we received information from the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian Air Force, that at least 2 military targets in this region, Vinnytsia region, were hit yesterday, and the Ukrainian authorities don't have information at the moment about casualties. They also don't specify where exactly those targets were, but they did say that they were military targets. So it's a reminder, that wherever you are in Ukraine, you might actually not be that far from a rocket strike. And the particularity about what happened yesterday evening here was that there were no air raid sirens before it happened. Normally there's always a warning when there are these long-range strikes, and so far the Ukrainian military have not specified either what type of missile was used, and so they're wondering whether or not there's some kind of new technology being used that didn't trigger off the warning systems.
And Gulliver, the UN is this morning calling for international inspectors to be given access to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. What do we know about what's happening there?
Well, this is absolutely the story that is most worrying Ukraine and the world at the moment. I remind you, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is occupied by Russian forces. It is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. It supplies 20% of Ukraine's electricity, and it continues to operate with its Ukrainian staff working there, despite the fact that it's operated by Russian forces. And 2 weeks ago, the agency that manages Ukraine's nuclear power plants, Energoatom, warned that the Russians had placed heavy equipment inside 2 of the reactor buildings, and they've got a very large military presence there. And now there have been various eruptions of fighting small arms fire in the nearby town and near the site over the last 2 weeks. And now there are these reports of shelling, which the Ukrainians say hit some storage area for spent nuclear fuel, and also some sensors there, which means that it's not possible to calculate whether or not the damage done to that storage area has led to any kind of radiation leak. The authorities in Energoatom say that the power station is now operating with a high risk of some kind of radioactive leakage and also a risk of fire. And as the director of Energoatom has warned, the military equipment that's there on site is in a way like a kind of mining, a de facto mining, because there's lots of explosives there on site. So the Ukrainians are very, very worried and are calling for international intervention. What they have been saying for weeks, though, is that they will, of course, not attempt to fire missiles at this site. That would be too dangerous. When you speak to Ukrainian officials of various kinds, they say all the time that's why the Russians are barricading themselves inside this site, is because they know that we won't fire on it. What the director of Energoatom has told me is that he thinks, and he's of course in touch with the Ukrainian armed forces, he believes their strategy will be to try to get the Russians out of there by surrounding the site, laying siege to it, if you will, and then trying to negotiate with them with international help. But the Ukrainians have been very clear for weeks now that they have no intention to fire rockets at the site because they understand how dangerous that would be. Energoatom thinks that what the Russians are trying to do is actually to cut off the site from the Ukrainian power grid in order to cause power outages. So they're not attempting to destroy the reactors or cause a nuclear accident. They're more trying to cut off the site in order to cause power outages. But that is in itself a very dangerous strategy because, of course, unless their missiles hit with very high precision exactly the wires and the connection facilities that they want to hit, they're in a very big danger of hitting something that could cause a much, much more serious kind of explosion.
A very worrying situation, as you say, Gulliver. We leave it there. That is our correspondent, Gulliver Cragg.